Julian Thorne thought he was untouchable. He was a man who had it all: a high-powered career, a reputation as a shark in the business world, and a secret life he thought he was clever enough to hide. As he stepped onto the deck of the massive $100 million superyacht with his stunning young mistress on his arm, he didn't care about the pregnant wife he had left crying at home. He thought she was weak. He thought she was oblivious. But Julian made one fatal mistake. He didn't check the deed to the yacht he was standing on. He had no idea that the captain wasn't saluting him. He was waiting for orders from the yacht's true owner. And when that helicopter lands on the deck, Julian's life is going to end, just not in the way he expects. The rain in Seattle was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, like 1,000 tiny fists demanding to be let in. Inside, the atmosphere was even colder. Julian Thorne adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror, admiring the sharp line of his jaw. He was 34, handsome in a way that suggested old money, even though he was new money, aggressive, loud, and perpetually hungry for more. He checked his reflection, ensuring not a single hair was out of place. He looked like a man going to war or a board meeting. In Julian's mind, they were the same thing. "Do you really have to go, Julian?" The voice was soft, trembling slightly. Julian didn't turn around immediately. He finished adjusting his cufflinks, solid gold, a gift from his partners at Thorne & Associates, before swiveling on his heel. Eleanor sat on the edge of the beige velvet sofa, her hands resting protectively over her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant, she looked exhausted. Her blonde hair, usually immaculate, was pulled back in a messy bun, and her face was devoid of makeup, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She looked nothing like the trophy wife he had paraded around 5 years ago. She looked domestic, boring. "Eleanor, we've been over this," Julian said, his tone clipped, bordering on patronizing. "The merger with the Mediterranean group is critical. If I don't go to Monaco personally to oversee the signing, the whole deal collapses. Do you want us to lose the lifestyle you're so accustomed to?" It was a low blow and entirely fabricated. Eleanor had never cared about the lifestyle. She came from a background Julian never fully understood, mostly because he never asked. She had been quiet about her family, simply stating her parents were comfortable and retired in Europe. Julian assumed comfortable meant upper middle class. He had no idea. "The doctor said my blood pressure is high," Eleanor whispered, looking down at her hands. "I don't feel right, Julian. I'm scared. What if the baby comes early?" Julian fought the urge to roll his eyes. He walked over, placing a stiff hand on her shoulder. "You're being dramatic, Elle. It's the hormones. You have the best doctors in the city on speed dial. The housekeeper is here. You're fine. I need to focus. I can't have you distracting me with what-ifs." He leaned down, pecking her on the forehead. It was a cold, practiced gesture. "I'll be back in 10 days. Don't wait up." Without waiting for a response, Julian grabbed his Toomey leather briefcase and walked out the door. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have noticed that Eleanor wasn't crying. She was watching him leave with a look that wasn't sadness. It was a terrifying, icy resolve. As the elevator doors slid shut, Julian pulled out his phone. His demeanor shifted instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a predatory grin. He dialed a number saved as accountant. "I'm in the car," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. "I'll be at the private airfield in 40 minutes. Is everything ready?" A female voice, sultry and decidedly not an accountant, answered. "I've been ready for hours, baby. I bought that bikini you liked, the red one." "Good," Julian purred. "Forget about Seattle. Forget about the rain. By tomorrow morning, Sienna, we'll be drinking Dom Perignon off the coast of Italy. Just you, me, and the biggest yacht I could charter. Sienna Blair, 23 years old, an aspiring model, and the current center of Julian's universe. She was everything Eleanor wasn't, loud, demanding, and obsessed with status. Julian loved the way she looked at him, like he was a god made of credit cards. He had told Eleanor he was going to Monaco for a merger. In reality, he had drained a significant portion of their joint savings, money he technically had access to, though Eleanor had contributed the bulk of the initial deposit years ago, to charter a superyacht for a 10-day cruise along the Amalfi coast. He deserved a break. He worked hard, and frankly, he was tired of the pregnant wife routine. The drive to the airfield was smooth. Sienna was waiting in the lounge, wearing oversized Gucci sunglasses and a trench coat that left little to the imagination. When she saw him, she squealed, throwing her arms around his neck. "Finally!" she exclaimed, kissing him deeply. "I thought you'd never escape the ball and chain." "Don't talk about her," Julian said, though he was smiling. "She's in the past. For the next 10 days, she doesn't exist." They boarded the private jet Julian had chartered. As the plane ascended, breaking through the grey cloud layer into the blinding sun above, Julian sipped his scotch and looked out the window. He felt like a king. He had the girl, he had the money, and he had the freedom. He had no idea that down below, in the penthouse he just left, Eleanor was picking up her own phone. She didn't dial a doctor. She didn't dial a friend. She dialed a number with a Monaco country code. "Captain," Eleanor said, her voice steady and commanding, shedding the trembling persona she had worn minutes ago. "He's on his way." Part 2. The Golden Horizon. The port of Naples was a chaotic symphony of shouting fishermen, honking scooters, and the smell of salt and diesel. But further down the coast, in a private marina reserved for the ultra-elite, the air smelled of money. Julian and Sienna stepped out of the black Mercedes limousine that had collected them from the airport. Sienna lowered her sunglasses, her jaw actually dropping. "Oh my God, Julian," she breathed. "Which one is it?" Julian scanned the row of gleaming white vessels. There were yachts, and then there were superyachts. He had told the brokerage firm he wanted the best. He wanted to impress Sienna, but mostly he wanted to validate his own ego. "That one?" Julian said, pointing to the behemoth at the end of the dock. It was a monstrosity of luxury, easily 200 feet long. Its hull was a sleek, metallic silver that shimmered in the Italian sun. 4 decks of glass and polished teak rose into the sky. On the stern, in elegant gold lettering, was the name, The Golden Horizon. It's massive," Sienna squealed, clutching his arm. "Only the best for us," Julian said, puffing out his chest. He adjusted his blazer and began walking down the pier, acting as if he had owned vessels like this his entire life. As they approached the gangway, a crew in crisp white uniforms stood in a perfect line. At the front was the captain. He was a tall man, perhaps in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes the color of the turbulent Atlantic. He stood with a rigid posture that suggested military background. His name tag read, Captain Elias Vance. Julian walked up the gangway, flashing his signature charming smile. "Captain, I'm Julian Thorne. This is Ms. Blair. I believe you're expecting us." Captain Vance didn't smile. He looked at Julian, then at Sienna, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction of a second too long. It wasn't a look of admiration. It was a look of assessment, cold and clinical. "Mr. Thorne," Vance said, his voice a deep baritone, "welcome aboard the Golden Horizon. We were informed of your arrival." Julian frowned slightly. He was used to staff fawning over him. The captain's tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Disdain? Amusement? Julian couldn't place it, and he brushed it off. The help was just the help, after all. Excellent, Julian said, handing his bag to a waiting deckhand without looking at him. We'll take a tour, and then I want champagne on the sun deck. The vintage Krug, not the Moe. The 1998 Krug Clos d'Ambonnet has already been chilled, sir, Vance replied smoothly. Julian blinked. That was a $3,000 bottle. He hadn't specifically requested that vintage, just the good stuff. He nodded, recovering his composure. Good initiative. Come on, Sienna. As the couple disappeared into the main salon, a cavernous room decorated with rare marble and original oil paintings, Captain Vance remained on the aft deck. The chief stewardess, a sharp-eyed woman named Maria, stepped up beside him. She watched Julian's retreating figure with a curled lip. "Is that him?" she asked in a low voice. "The husband?" "That's him," Vance confirmed, his jaw tightening. "And the woman?" "Not the wife," Vance said simply. "Disgusting," Maria muttered. "Does she know?" Vance turned to look at the horizon, where the blue sky met the sea. He pulled a satellite phone from his pocket. "She knows everything, Maria. She knew before he even booked the flight." "What are the orders, Captain?" Vance looked down at the phone. He had received a text message just as the limousine pulled up. It was short, brutal, and from the owner of the vessel. Let him have his fun for 2 days. Give him everything he asks for. Make him feel like a king, and keep the course set for open water. I'll be there on the 3rd day. "The orders are to play the part," Vance said, putting the phone away. "We serve Mr. Thorne. We pour his wine. We laugh at his jokes, and we sail him into the middle of the Tyrrhenian Sea." And then? Vance allowed himself a small, grim smile. "And then we prepare for the storm." Inside the yacht, Julian was in ecstasy. The interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. The master suite was larger than his first apartment, featuring a rotating bed and a ceiling that retracted to show the stars. "Baby, look at this bathroom!" Sienna yelled from the ensuite. "The taps are gold, real gold." Julian walked in, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I told you I'd take care of you, didn't I?" "You're the best," she cooed, turning to kiss him. "I can't believe you pulled this off. This must cost a fortune." "Don't worry about the cost," Julian said arrogantly. "My company is doing better than ever, and besides," he chuckled darkly, "Eleanor thinks I'm in a stuffy boardroom right now." Sienna laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "She's probably eating ice cream and crying over a soap opera. God, how do you stand her?" "I don't," Julian said, his face hardening. "Once the baby is born, I'm filing for divorce. I'll get full custody. She's too unstable. And then I'm taking half of whatever her parents left her. We'll be set for life." He didn't know that the entire room was bugged. 3 decks below, in the security control room, Captain Vance sat with headphones on. He listened to every word Julian said. Beside him, a digital recorder was spinning, archiving the conversation. Vance pressed a button on the console, connecting him to a private encrypted line. "Mrs. Thorne?" Vance said softly. "I'm here, Elias." Eleanor's voice came through, crystal clear. "He's on board. He's with the Mistress. And he just outlined his plan to divorce you and take the child." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a long, heavy silence that made the air in the control room feel thin. "Did you get it on tape?" Eleanor asked. Her voice didn't waver. "Every word, Ma'am." "Good," Eleanor said. "Keep the recording safe. Elias?" "Yes, Ma'am." "Does he like the yacht?" Vance glanced at the monitor showing Julian opening the $3,000 champagne. "He seems to be enjoying it very much. He thinks he chartered it." Let him enjoy it, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down Vance's spine. It's the last thing he'll ever enjoy. I'll see you in 48 hours. Prepare the helipad. For the next 48 hours, Julian Thorne lived in a fantasy that he believed he had purchased. The golden horizon sliced through the Tyrrhenian Sea like a silver dagger, leaving a wake of white foam and broken promises behind it. The days were a blur of excess. Julian and Sienna spent their mornings on the yacht's private beach club, a hydraulic platform that lowered into the ocean, sipping mimosas and blasting music that echoed off the jagged cliffs of Capri. They took the jet skis out, Julian roaring the engine, cutting dangerously close to local fishing boats, laughing as the fishermen shouted curses at him. He felt powerful, untouchable. But there were cracks in the perfection, tiny fissures that a smarter man would have noticed. On the second evening they were seated for dinner on the upper deck. The table was set with crystal stemware and silverware that felt heavy in the hand. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. "This is the life, baby," Sienna said, picking at a lobster tail. She was wearing a diamond necklace Julian had bought her 3 months ago, using a bonus check he had told Eleanor didn't exist. "I was thinking, when we get back, maybe we should look at penthouses in Miami. Seattle is so gloomy." "Miami sounds good," Julian agreed, swirling his red wine. "I can run the firm from anywhere. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll liquidate the Seattle assets." Captain Vance approached the table. He moved silently, like a ghost in a white uniform. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mr. Thorne?" "The lobster is a bit tough," Julian lied, mostly just to exercise power. "But the wine is acceptable." "I apologize, sir," Vance said, his face an unreadable mask. "I will inform the chef. By the way, sir, we have entered international waters. The Wi-Fi might be spotty for your personal devices for the next 24 hours. Satellite realignment." Julian frowned, checking his phone. "No signal. That's inconvenient, Captain. I have business to monitor." "I'm afraid it's a mandatory protocol for this vessel when crossing certain maritime boundaries," Vance said smoothly. "However, the ship's internal comms are working perfectly." "Fine," Julian snapped. "Just fix it by tomorrow." "Of course." Vance lingered for a moment. "Mr. Thorne, if I may ask, you mentioned your business is in finance?" "Mergers and acquisitions," Julian said, puffing out his chest. "I take failing companies and strip them for parts, or turn them around, depending on what's more profitable." "Fascinating," Vance said. "It must take a certain lack of attachment to do that." Julian laughed coldly. "Sentiment is for the poor, Captain. In my world, you eat or you get eaten." "Indeed," Vance murmured. "Eat or get eaten, a very maritime philosophy." As the captain walked away, Julian felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck. He turned to look, but the deck was empty. Later that night, the glitches got weirder. Julian went to the ship's library, a room filled with first-edition books, looking for a place to smoke a cigar. He found a book lying open on the mahogany desk. It wasn't a random book. It was a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. Julian picked it up. He remembered Eleanor reading this book years ago, during their honeymoon. She had been obsessed with it. He glanced at the page it was open to. A passage was underlined in red ink. "For there is neither happiness nor misery in the world. There is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness." "Weird," Julian muttered, snapping the book shut. He tossed it onto a chair. He didn't think about why a crew member would leave a book open to that specific page. He was too focused on the fact that the humidor on the desk contained Cohiba Behiques, cigars that cost more than his first car. He lit one, blew smoke into the air-conditioned room, and stared out the porthole into the pitch-black ocean. He felt like the master of the universe. He didn't know that the ship had changed course 3 hours ago. They weren't heading toward the Amalfi Coast anymore. Captain Vance had steered the Golden Horizon due south into deep, open water, miles away from any shipping lanes. The trap was set. The mouse was just finishing his cheese. The morning of the third day didn't bring the sun. It brought a steel-grey sky and a chopping sea that made the massive yacht sway gently. Julian woke up with a headache. The movement of the ship annoyed him. He rolled over, expecting to see Sienna, but the bed was empty. He threw on a silk robe and stomped out of the master suite. "Sienna!" he called out. He found her on the aft deck, looking pale. She was clutching the railing, staring at the horizon. "What's wrong with you?" Julian asked, shielding his eyes against the glare of the grey sky. "We stopped," Sienna said, her voice trembling. "Julian, look." Julian walked to the railing. She was right. The engines were idling. The yacht was dead in the water, and all around them there was nothing. No land, no other boats, just miles of restless, dark blue ocean. "Captain!" Julian bellowed. Vance appeared from the bridge stairs almost instantly, flanked by 2 large crew members Julian hadn't noticed before. They weren't wearing the crisp white service uniforms. They wore dark blue tactical polos and cargo pants. They looked less like deckhands and more like private security. "Why have we stopped?" Julian demanded. "We're supposed to be in Positano by lunch." "Change of plans, Mr. Thorne," Vance said. His voice had lost the servile tone. It was hard, commanding. "The owner is coming aboard for an unscheduled inspection." Julian's face turned red. "The owner? You told me I had the charter for 10 days. I paid a deposit of $50,000. This is unacceptable. Tell the owner to wait until we dock." "The owner does not wait," Vance said simply. "Do you know who I am?" Julian shouted, stepping forward. The 2 large men behind Vance stepped forward too, crossing their arms. Julian stopped. He wasn't a fighter. He was a bully who used lawyers, not fists. "I don't care about the owner," Julian spat. "I'll sue the charter company. I'll sue you. I'll have your license stripped." "You can take that up with her when she arrives," Vance said. "Her?" Julian sneered. "Great. Some rich widow with nothing better to do. When does she get here?" "Now," Vance said, pointing to the sky. A low thrumming sound vibrated through the deck. It grew louder, a rhythmic thwop, thwop, thwop that beat against Julian's chest. From the clouds, a black shape emerged. It was an Airbus H160, a sleek, predatory-looking helicopter. It banked sharply, circling the yacht once before descending toward the helipad on the upper deck. "Come with me," Vance ordered. It wasn't a request. Julian grabbed Sienna's hand. "Come on. Let's go give this owner a piece of my mind. I'll probably end up buying this boat just to fire you, Vance." They marched up the stairs to the helipad. The wind from the rotors whipped Julian's robe and messed up Sienna's hair. She looked terrified, but Julian was running on pure adrenaline and entitlement. The helicopter touched down. The engines whined as they powered down. The side door slid open. A set of stairs unfolded. First, a bodyguard stepped out, a giant of a man in a black suit. He scanned the deck, his eyes locking on Julian. Then he reached a hand back inside to help the passenger. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, tailored to accommodate her 7-month pregnancy, but stylish enough to belong on a runway. She wore oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf wrapped around her head to protect her hair from the wind. She moved with a grace that belied her condition. Julian squinted. The woman looked familiar, but the context was so wrong, his brain refused to process it. He was expecting a stranger. The woman walked across the deck, her heels clicking on the metal. She stopped 10 feet away from Julian. She reached up and slowly removed her sunglasses. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab Sienna's arm to stay upright. Sienna let out a confused gasp. "Eleanor," Julian whispered. The word came out like a choke. It was his wife. But it wasn't the Eleanor he had left in Seattle. That Eleanor was soft, weepy, and wore oversized sweaters. This Eleanor stood with her spine straight, her chin high, looking at him with eyes that were colder than the ocean surrounding them. "Hello, Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried over the wind. "I hope you're enjoying the amenities. I had the sheets in the master suite changed to Egyptian cotton just for you. I know how you hate anything under 800 thread count." What? How?" Julian stammered. He looked at the helicopter, then at the yacht, then back at her. "You followed me? You rented a helicopter?" Eleanor laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Rented? Oh, Julian, you really never paid attention, did you?" She gestured to the yacht around them. "I didn't follow you, Julian. I welcomed you. This is my boat." "Your boat?" Julian looked at Sienna, who was staring at Eleanor with her mouth open. "That's impossible. Your parents are retired teachers. You clip coupons." "My parents are dead," Eleanor said sharply. "They died 10 years ago. The people you met at the wedding? Actors. Paid to be boring." She took a step closer. "My name isn't just Eleanor Thorne. I was born Eleanor van der Hoven. Does that ring a bell?" Julian's mouth went dry. Van der Hoven. It was a name whispered in finance circles with reverence. Shipping magnates, steel tycoons, old European money that made Julian's wealth look like pocket change. You're a van der Hoven?" "The sole heiress," Eleanor corrected. "I wanted a life away from the vultures. I wanted to see if I could find someone who loved me for me, not for the shipping empire I'm going to inherit. I thought I found that in you." She looked at him with pure disgust. "I played the role of the supportive, middle-class wife. I cooked your dinner. I listened to your petty complaints about your big deals. I let you think you were the provider because I knew your fragile ego needed it." "Eleanor, wait," Julian started, holding up his hands. His mind was racing. Van der Hoven, billions. He had to fix this. "Baby, listen. This is just a misunderstanding. I was stressed. I just needed a break. I love you. We're having a baby." He took a step toward her. The bodyguard stepped in front of Eleanor, his hand resting on a holster under his jacket. "Don't," Eleanor said. "Don't you dare use our child as a bargaining chip." She turned her gaze to Sienna. The mistress shrank back. "And you must be Sienna," Eleanor said smoothly. "I see you're wearing the bikini I paid for. Julian used our joint account for his little shopping spree. Technically, that makes me your sponsor." "I didn't know," Sienna squealed, stepping away from Julian. "He told me he was divorced. He told me you were crazy." "He lies a lot," Eleanor said. "But here is the truth." Eleanor snapped her fingers. Captain Vance stepped forward, holding a thick file folder. He handed it to Eleanor. "This yacht," Eleanor said, tapping the railing, "is the Golden Horizon. It's held in a trust under my maiden name. The crew works for me. The fuel you burned, my money. The champagne you drank, from my private cellar." She threw the file folder at Julian's feet. Photos spilled out. Julian with Sienna at the airport. Julian transferring money. And most damning of all, a transcript of his conversation from the night before, where he detailed his plan to divorce Eleanor and take the baby. "I heard everything, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "I heard you say you were going to take my child. I heard you call me unstable." She rubbed her belly gently. "You wanted a shark, Julian? You wanted to play in the big leagues? Congratulations. You just swam into the deepest part of the ocean." "What? What are you going to do?" Julian asked, his voice trembling. He looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere. The crew was loyal to her. "You can't hurt me. People know I'm here." "Actually," Vance interjected, "according to the flight logs and the marina records, Mr. Julian Thorne never boarded this vessel. The manifest lists a Mr. Smith. You insisted on anonymity, remember?" Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. "Eleanor, please. We can work this out. I'll sign a post-nup. I'll walk away. Just let us off." "Let you off?" Eleanor smiled. "Oh, I intend to. But we have some business to conclude first." She turned to Vance. "Captain, bring him to the stateroom. We're going to renegotiate his exit package." "And her?" Vance asked, nodding at Sienna. Eleanor looked at the terrified young woman. "Put her in a lifeboat. Give her a bottle of water and a flare gun. If she's lucky, the Italian Coast Guard patrols this sector on Tuesdays." "No, please!" Sienna screamed as two crew members grabbed her arms. "Eleanor!" Julian shouted as the bodyguard grabbed him by the collar. "Save your breath, Julian," Eleanor said, turning her back on him and walking toward the bridge. "You're going to need it." Julian Thorne was not taken to the master suite. He was not taken to the VIP guest rooms with the ocean views and the Egyptian cotton sheets. Two of the tactical security guards, men whose necks were thicker than Julian's thighs, marched him down a narrow service stairwell. The air grew cooler, smelling faintly of ozone and engine grease. They reached the lowest deck, the waterline level usually reserved for storage and the brig. They shoved him into a small, windowless room. It contained a metal table, two bolted-down chairs, and a single flickering LED strip overhead. It was stark, cold, and terrifyingly silent. "Wait!" Julian shouted, as the heavy steel door slammed shut. "You can't do this! This is kidnapping! I'm an American citizen!" The lock clicked with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Julian was alone. He paced the small room, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He checked his pockets. They had taken his phone, his wallet, even his gold cufflinks. He felt naked without the symbols of his status. Minutes turned into hours. The silence was maddening. He tried to rationalize the situation. "Eleanor won't hurt me," he told himself. "She's pregnant. She's emotional. This is just a scare tactic. She loves me. She needs a father for the child." He clung to that thought. He was the father. That was his leverage. The door hissed open. Julian spun around, ready to negotiate, ready to charm, ready to manipulate. Eleanor walked in. She had changed out of the trench coat into a sharp, black business suit that tailored perfectly around her baby bump. She held a tablet in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. She sat down, placing the water on the table for herself, offering him nothing. Behind her, Captain Vance stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking the exit. "Sit down, Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice was devoid of the warmth he had known for 5 years. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a hostile shareholder. Julian sat. He tried a smile, but it faltered. Honey, look, you've made your point. The boat is yours. The money is yours. I'm impressed, really. I always knew there was more to you." "Stop," Eleanor said. She didn't shout. She simply held up a hand, and Julian's mouth snapped shut. "Let's verify some assets, shall we?" She tapped the tablet. A holographic projection didn't appear. This wasn't a sci-fi movie. but she slid the tablet across the table so he could see the screen. It was a live video feed. The screen showed a small, inflatable tender bobbing in the middle of the grey ocean. Sienna was sitting in it, huddled in a bright orange life vest, looking like a drowned rat. She was holding a satellite phone, crying hysterically. "Sienna seems to be having a bad day," Eleanor noted dryly. "We offered her a choice. She could stay on the yacht and face charges as an accomplice to your embezzlement, or she could take the tender and a GPS coordinate for the nearest Italian Coast Guard vessel. She chose the boat before I even finished the sentence." "Accomplice," Julian sputtered. "Embezzlement." "Eleanor, don't be ridiculous. I used our money for the trip. It's a marital asset. That's not embezzlement." "I'm not talking about the vacation, Julian," Eleanor said. She swiped the screen. A new document appeared. It was a spreadsheet, complex, dense, and filled with numbers that made Julian's blood run cold. "Thorne and Associates," Eleanor began, reading from the screen. "You're a senior partner. You manage the portfolios for 3 major tech firms in Seattle, or rather, you did." Julian froze. "How do you have those files? That's confidential client data. You're breaking the law just by having that." "I own the data, Julian," Eleanor said softly. Julian blinked. "What?" "Thorne and Associates. Who is your biggest investor? Who provided the capital for the firm's expansion in 2019? The Obsidian Group," Julian recalled. "A venture capital firm out of Zurich." Eleanor leaned forward. "And who owns the Obsidian Group?" Julian stared at her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face completely. "No," he whispered. "No way." "My father set up the Obsidian Group 20 years ago to manage high-risk assets," Eleanor said. "When he died, it passed to me. I have been your boss's boss for 6 years, Julian. I watched you climb the ladder. I watched you cut corners. I watched you inflate your commission reports." She tapped the table with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "I let it slide because I thought you were just ambitious. I thought you were building a future for us. But then you started moving money into offshore accounts in the Caymans, accounts under the name JT Holdings." Julian was shaking now. I was going to put it back. It was just a bridge loan. For an investment." "It was $4.2 million, Julian," Eleanor stated. "And you used it to buy crypto and speculate on oil futures, and you lost 40% of it." "I can fix it," Julian pleaded, reaching across the table. Captain Vance stepped forward, his hand dropping to the baton on his belt. Julian recoiled. "Elle, please, I can fix it. Just give me time. Don't destroy me." "I haven't even started," Eleanor said. "You see, Julian, the tragedy isn't that you stole from me. The tragedy is that you underestimated me. You thought I was a simple, domestic creature. You thought you could stash me in a penthouse and live a double life." She stood up, walking slowly around the small room. "Do you know why I hid who I was?" she asked. Julian shook his head, tears of panic stinging his eyes. "Because money is a poison," Eleanor said, her hand resting on her stomach. "It rots people. I wanted to know if a man could love me without the Van der Hoeven billions. When I met you, you were charming. You were driven. I thought, here is a man who wants to build something with me." She stopped behind him, leaning down to whisper in his ear. "But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a prop. And when the prop got pregnant and boring, you went shopping for a new one. I made a mistake," Julian sobbed. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Sorry is a feeling," Eleanor said, straightening up. "I don't care about your feelings, Julian. I care about facts. And the fact is, You are currently in international waters, aboard a vessel flagged in the Cayman Islands, having confessed to embezzling funds from a Cayman-registered corporation. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Do you know the penalty for grand larceny and corporate fraud in the Caymans? It's quite severe. And their prisons, well, let's just say they don't have Egyptian cotton sheets. You wouldn't, Julian gasped. I'm your husband. Think of the press. Think of the scandal. Oh, I have thought of the press, Eleanor said. That's why we're moving to part 2 of our meeting. She nodded to Vance. Captain, set up the link. Captain Vance opened a metal panel on the wall, revealing a high-definition screen and a camera. He typed a code into a keypad. The screen flickered to life. A man in a grey suit appeared. He was sitting in a glass-walled office with the London skyline in the background. He looked like a shark in human skin, sharp features, rimless glasses, and an expression of utter boredom. Mr. Sterling, Eleanor said. Can you hear us? Loud and clear, Mrs. Thorne, the lawyer replied. His British accent was clipped and precise. Is the subject in position? He is, Eleanor said. Julian looked at the screen. Who is that? This is Arthur Sterling, Eleanor introduced. He is the head of legal counsel for the Van der Hoeven estate. He is also the man who is currently holding a document that can end your life as a free man. Sterling held up a thick stack of papers. Mr. Thorne, I have here a criminal referral to the FBI, the SEC, and the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. It details your embezzlement, your insider trading from last May, and your unauthorized use of company funds for illicit personal travel. Julian felt like he was going to vomit. Insider trading? That was... Everyone does that. It was a tip. It was a felony, Sterling corrected. Now, Mrs. Thorne has instructed me to offer you an alternative. Julian's head snapped up. Alternative? Anything. I'll do anything. Eleanor slid a single piece of paper across the metal table. It wasn't a thick contract. It was a single page. This, Eleanor said, is a confession of judgment and a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. The room went silent. Read it, she commanded. Julian picked up the paper, his hands shaking so hard the text blurred. I, Julian Thorne, hereby admit to the theft of $4.2 million. I agree to the immediate liquidation of all personal assets to repay the debt. I hereby waive all rights to contest the divorce. He scanned down to the bottom paragraph. And acknowledging my unfitness due to criminal conduct, I hereby voluntarily terminate all parental rights to the unborn child of Eleanor Thorne, waiving any future claim to custody or visitation. You can't ask me to do that, Julian whispered. That's my child. You lost the right to be a father when you planned to leave his mother for a 20-year-old gold digger while spending his college fund on champagne, Eleanor hissed. The anger finally broke through her icy mask. Her eyes blazed with fury. You wanted to divorce me. You wanted to take him from me. I heard the tape, Julian. You said I was unstable. You said you'd take him and hire a nanny. She slammed her hand on the table, making Julian jump. You don't want a child, Julian. You want an heir. You want an accessory. Well, you don't get one, not from me. I won't sign it, Julian said, trying to muster some defiance. I'll fight you in court. No judge will enforce a contract signed under duress on a boat in the middle of the ocean. You're right, Eleanor agreed calmly, the fire vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. A judge might throw this out if you claimed duress. She looked at the screen. Mr. Sterling, go ahead with Plan B. Certainly, Sterling said. I am submitting the evidence to the district attorney in Seattle as we speak. The warrant for your arrest should be issued within the hour. When you dock, anywhere in the world, Interpol will be waiting. You'll face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Your assets will be frozen immediately. You will have no money for a lawyer. You will be a pauper in a cage." Sterling paused for effect. "And Mr. Thorne? A convicted felon serving a 20-year sentence for financial fraud against his own family has zero chance of being awarded custody. You will lose the child anyway. The only difference is, under Plan B, you also lose your freedom." Julian looked from the screen to Eleanor. She was watching him with the detachment of an executioner. "The choice is yours," Eleanor said. "Option A. You sign the paper. You admit to the fraud privately. I fire you from the firm, but I don't press criminal charges. We frame it as a mental health break. You keep your freedom. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free. But you never ever come near me or my child again. Option B," she continued, "you go to prison today, and you still lose the child." The silence stretched. The hum of the yacht's generator was the only sound. Julian realized he had been checkmated from the moment he stepped onto the plane in Seattle. He was a small man playing a giant's game. He looked at the pen Eleanor had placed on the table. It was a Mont Blanc, probably one he had bought with her money. "If I sign," Julian's voice cracked, "how do I get home?" "We dock in Palermo in 6 hours," Eleanor said. "You get off. You find your own way back to America. You start over. Far away from me." Julian picked up the pen. He thought about his reputation. He thought about the prison cell. He thought about his ego. He didn't think about the baby. He signed. He scratched his signature across the line, signing away his marriage, his fortune, and his firstborn child in a single stroke. Eleanor snatched the paper away the moment the pen lifted. She checked the signature. "Witnessed?" Vance said. "Witnessed," Sterling said from the screen. Eleanor stood up. She looked at Julian, who was slumped in the chair, a broken man. "You know the saddest part, Julian?" she asked, pausing at the door. He didn't look up. "If you had just come to me, if you had just told me you were struggling, or that you were unhappy, I would have given you the world. I would have helped you build your own empire. We could have been partners." She placed a hand on the doorknob. "But you were too busy trying to be a king to realize you were married to an empress." She stepped out. "Captain, keep him locked in here until we reach Palermo. Give him a sandwich. I don't want him starving. He needs his strength to look for a job." The door slammed shut, sealing Julian in the darkness once again. The port of Palermo was sweltering when the Golden Horizon finally docked. It wasn't the glamorous arrival Julian had envisioned days ago. There were no paparazzi, no champagne, and no limousine waiting to whisk him away to a 5-star hotel. 2 of Captain Vance's security officers escorted Julian to the bottom of the gangway. They tossed his leather Toomey bag onto the dusty concrete. It looked pathetic there, scuffed and lonely. "Mr. Thorne," Vance called down from the deck. He was holding something small and metallic. "You forgot this." He tossed a small object through the air. Julian caught it instinctively. It was his wedding ring. "The boss said she doesn't want it clogging up the ship's trash compactor," Vance said coldishly. "Have a safe trip home, sir." With that, the gangway retracted. The massive engines of the Golden Horizon rumbled to life, churning the harbor water into a frothy white. Julian stood there, wearing a wrinkled linen suit that smelled of sweat and fear, watching the $100 million vessel pull away. He watched until it was nothing but a gleaming speck on the horizon, taking his wife, his unborn child, and his entire future with it. He checked his pockets. He had his passport and €200 in cash. Charity Eleanor had allowed him, so he wouldn't starve before he reached the consulate. Julian Thorne, the shark of Seattle, the man who thought he was a king, walked into the crowded streets of Palermo looking for a payphone. He had to call his lawyer. He had to fix this. But as he would soon learn, you cannot fix an avalanche once it has already fallen. 5 years later, the rain in New York City was just as relentless as it had been in Seattle, but tonight, the lights of Manhattan made the wet pavement glitter like diamonds. Outside the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a line of black SUVs and limousines idled. It was the night of the Global Maritime Gala, the most prestigious event in the shipping and logistics industry. The air smelled of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was electric. A hush fell over the crowd as the keynote speaker was announced. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome the CEO of Van der Hoeven Global and this year's recipient of the Titan of Industry Award, Eleanor Van der Hoeven." The applause was thunderous. Eleanor stepped onto the stage. She looked breathtaking. She wore a custom emerald green gown by Versace that accentuated her strength and elegance. Her hair was cut in a sharp, chic bob. She radiated power. She wasn't the quiet, pregnant woman sitting on a beige sofa anymore. She was a titan. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice projecting confidence to the back of the room. 5 years ago, I took full control of my family's legacy. Many thought a single mother couldn't steer a multi-billion-dollar empire through a recession. They bet against me. She smiled, a predatory glint in her eye that the audience loved. I'm happy to say, the house always wins. As she spoke about sustainability and new trade routes, a small boy, no older than 5, watched from a VIP table near the front. He was dressed in a miniature tuxedo, his blonde hair combed neatly to the side. He sat next to Arthur Sterling, the lawyer, who was now a trusted family advisor. "Is Mummy almost done?" the boy whispered. "Almost, Leo," Sterling whispered back kindly. "She's just telling everyone how she won." Leo Van der Hoeven. He had his mother's eyes and his father's chin, but he would never know the man who gave him that chin. To Leo, his family was his mother, their staff, and the vast ocean they traveled on. In the back of the ballroom, the service doors swung open. Waiters in white jackets flooded out, carrying trays of champagne for the toast. One waiter, older than the others, moved with a slight limp. His face was lined with premature wrinkles, and his hair was thinning. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with the guests. He was focused on not dropping the tray. He needed this job. The catering agency had been clear. One mistake, and he was out. The waiter moved through the crowd, offering glasses. "Champagne, sir. Champagne, ma'am." He reached the edge of the VIP section, just as Eleanor finished her speech. The crowd erupted in applause again. Eleanor walked down the steps, beaming, and scooped little Leo up into her arms. "Did you see me, Leo?" she asked, kissing his cheek. "You were loud, Mummy." Leo giggled. The waiter froze. The tray in his hand trembled, the crystal glasses clinking together softly. He knew that laugh. He knew that voice. Julian Thorne stood 10 feet away, frozen in his cheap, ill-fitting waiter's uniform. He stared at the woman on the stage. She was glowing. She was magnificent. She was everything he had thrown away for a week of fun on a boat with a girl whose name he couldn't even remember anymore. And then he looked at the boy. The breath left Julian's lungs. It was like looking in a mirror from 30 years ago. The boy was him. That was his son. Julian took an involuntary step forward. "Elle." The word formed on his lips, soundless. Security was tight. A large man in a dark suit, the same bodyguard from the helicopter 5 years ago, stepped into Julian's path. He didn't recognize Julian immediately. Julian had aged poorly, worn down by bankruptcy, legal battles, and the crushing weight of regret. But the guard recognized the unauthorized proximity. "Back to the service area," the guard growled low. "VIPs only." Julian looked at the guard. Then he looked back at Eleanor. For a split second, Eleanor's eyes scanned the crowd. Her gaze swept over the sea of admirers, the billionaires, the rivals. Her eyes landed on the waiter for a heartbeat. There was no flicker of recognition, no spark of anger. Nothing. To her, he was just part of the background scenery, a faceless server holding a tray. She looked right through him and turned back to her son. "Come on, Leo," Eleanor said, laughing. "Let's go get some ice cream. We're celebrating." "Chocolate?" Leo asked. "Double chocolate," Eleanor promised. They walked away, surrounded by their entourage, disappearing into the flashbulbs of the paparazzi. Julian was left standing in the shadows. "Hey, you!" the catering manager hissed, grabbing Julian's arm. "Stop daydreaming. Table 4 needs a refill. Move it or you're fired." Julian blinked, the tears stinging his eyes. He looked at the door where his wife and son had vanished. He looked down at the tray of champagne, the same champagne he used to drink by the bottle, now something he only served to others. "Yes, sir," Julian whispered, his voice breaking. "Right away, sir." He turned around and walked back into the kitchen, the noise of the applause fading behind him, leaving him in the silence of a life he had destroyed with his own hands. He had wanted to be a king, but in the end, he was just a ghost at the banquet. And that is the tragic, satisfying end of Julian Thorne. He thought he could play games with a woman's heart, but he forgot to check who held the deck of cards. It's a brutal reminder that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes the grass you're standing on is made of gold, and you just don't realize it until you've lost it. What do you think? Did Eleanor go too far by keeping his son away? Or did Julian get exactly what he deserved for his betrayal? I want to hear your verdict in the comments below. Team Eleanor or Team Mercy? If you enjoyed this story of drama, revenge, and justice, please destroy that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. We release new drama stories every week, and you do not want to miss the next one. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.